Hello, and thank you for joining me. My name is Dr. Lilian Petrova, and for the past 10 years, my entire academic family has been under the quiet, shared assumption that I am a failure. A brilliant but misguided soul who took a perfectly good PhD in modern European history and squandered it, becoming a ghostwriter for people with more money than talent. Tonight, that family is gathered in the city's most opulent ballroom for a gala celebrating my father, the celebrated Professor Alistair Petrova. They are launching his magnum opus, a book he's worked on my entire adult life. He has absolutely no idea that his publisher, finding the manuscript a dense, unreadable disaster, secretly hired an anonymous expert to save it from the slush pile. He doesn't know that I was that expert. And he certainly doesn't know that in about an hour, from a podium bathed in golden light, his publisher is going to ask the book's brilliant co author to take a bow. What would you do if your moment of vindication required the public humiliation of the one person whose approval you'd spent your entire life craving? Before I reveal how the air crackled in that ballroom and what it feels like to hold your family's legacy in the palm of your hand, I want to invite you to be a part of this community. Let me know where in the world you're watching from in the comments below. And if you've ever felt underestimated or had to fight to be seen for who you really are, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe, because this is a space for stories just like this one. The moment my academic career truly died, it didn't happen with a bang, but with the quiet, polite applause of a dozen tenured professors in a stuffy, wood-paneled room. It was my PhD defense. I remember the smell of old paper and lemon polish, the way the afternoon light struggled through the tall, grimy windows of the history department. I had just spent 45 minutes passionately defending my dissertation on the role of female artisans in the Austro-Hungarian textile trade, a topic I believed was a vital, overlooked piece of social history. My committee was pleased. Dr. Albright, my own advisor, was beaming. But I wasn't looking at them. My eyes were fixed on my father, Alistair Petrova, who sat in the back row, his arms crossed, his expression one of patient, paternal tolerance. He was a titan in our world, a man whose books on Bismarck and the unification of Germany were required reading in universities across the globe. His presence was a rare honor, or so everyone told me. To me, it felt like a judgment. When the floor was opened for questions, he was the first to speak. His voice, a familiar baritone honed by decades of lecturing to packed auditoriums, filled the room. "Lillian," he began, and I felt a familiar clenching in my stomach. It was the tone he used before delivering a correction. A commendable effort, truly. He let the words hang in the air, a velvet-draped brick. "You've marshaled your sources with a certain diligence." I waited for the but. It was always there. "My only observation is one of scope. While these craftswomen are no doubt an interesting historical footnote, one must ask if focusing on such a niche subject, a tributary, detracts from the great river of history itself, the politics, the wars, the great men who shaped the continent." He wasn't asking a question. He was delivering a verdict. In his eyes, I had chosen to study the wallpaper while he was rebuilding the palace. My work was small, quaint, feminine. I stammered a response about the importance of social history from the ground up, but the damage was done. He had subtly framed my achievement as a well-researched hobby, not a serious contribution to the field. He smiled a thin, professorly smile and nodded. As I said, a commendable effort. The public praise was just enough to seem supportive. The private meaning was crystal clear to me. "You are not like me. You are less than 0.5. That pattern defined the next decade of my life. My brother Daniel, 2 years my senior, had wisely sidestepped the academic arena altogether. He'd gone into corporate law, a world of mergers and acquisitions that my father found vaguely distasteful, but undeniably successful. Daniel's promotions were cause for grand celebrations at expensive restaurants. The family would gather, and my father would hold court, raising a glass of obscenely priced wine. "To Daniel," he would boom, "a man of substance," making his mark on the world. My mother, Eleanor, would be radiant, her pride for her son a tangible thing. She was the perfect academic's wife, a woman who had sublimated her own ambitions into the careful curation of her husband's career and the championing of her successful son. Daniel, for his part, played the role of the golden child with ease. He was charming, handsome, and knew how to reflect our father's light back at him, making it seem even brighter. My own achievements were met with a different kind of energy. I'd secured a postdoctoral fellowship, a notoriously competitive position. At a family dinner shortly after, I tried to share my excitement. "It's at the Maxwell Institute," I explained, my voice tight with a hope I should have known better than to feel. "I'll have access to their entire archive of 17th century correspondence." My father took a slow sip of his wine. "Ah, the Maxwell. Yes. A bit provincial, but they have a few decent collections. Is that fully funded, Lillian?" The question was a subtle dig at the precarious finances of an early career academic. "Yes," I said, my enthusiasm deflating like a punctured balloon. My mother quickly interjected, her social graces honed to a fine point. "That's wonderful, dear. We're so proud you're keeping busy." Keeping busy. As if I were knitting or tending a garden. Then she turned to my brother. "Daniel, tell your father about the deal you closed last week, the one with the German tech firm." And just like that, the conversation shifted. The spotlight swiveled to Daniel, and I was left in the familiar, comfortable shade of the family's collective indifference. I watched as my father, who had dismissed my research as a tributary, leaned forward, suddenly animated, grilling Daniel on the finer points of international contract law. I became a spectator at my own family table. I remember one Sunday roast with excruciating clarity. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the air of their large, perfectly appointed home, a house filled with books my father had written and artifacts from his research trips. I had just had an article accepted by the Journal of Modern European Studies, a top-tier publication. It was a huge deal for me, a sign that my work had value, that my voice mattered in my field. I waited for a lull in the conversation, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. "I have some good news," I said, trying to sound casual. "My paper on the Habsburg salt trade routes was just accepted for publication." My father looked up from carving the roast, a sliver of beef poised on the tip of his fork. "Oh? Which journal?" he asked. I told him. He nodded slowly. "Ah, yes. They have a progressive editorial board these days. Good for you." The word progressive was used as a pejorative, a synonym for not rigorous enough. My mother smiled brightly. "Isn't that nice, Alistair? Lillian is getting her little articles published." Little articles. It felt like a pat on the head. Daniel, ever the jester, chimed in. "Careful, Dad. At this rate, she'll be challenging your legacy." He winked at me, but the joke was sour. The unspoken punchline was, "As if she ever could." I just smiled, a tight, painful stretch of my lips. "Why don't you say something?" a voice screamed in my head. "Why do you let them do this?" But I didn't. I picked up my fork and ate my perfectly cooked slice of beef, the taste turning to ash in my mouth. I had learned over years of these small, casual dismissals that fighting back was pointless. It only ever led to them closing ranks, treating me like an overly emotional child who couldn't take a bit of constructive criticism. My passivity was a shield, but it was one that was slowly crushing me. The family narrative was set in stone. Alistair was the genius, Eleanor was his priestess, Daniel was the heir apparent in the world of real success, and I, Lillian, was the court eccentric, the artistic one with a PhD she clearly didn't know what to do with, the perpetual, gentle disappointment. After my fellowship ended, the tenure-track job market was a barren wasteland. I was overqualified for some positions, not a perfect fit for others. The rejections piled up. I found myself adrift, my confidence shattered, the echo of my father's words, niche subject, tributary, haunting me. I needed to pay rent. So I started taking on small freelance editing jobs for other graduate students. I was good at it. I could take a tangled, jargon-filled mess of an essay and transform it into something clear, elegant, and persuasive. Word spread. Soon, I was editing for professors, then for people outside academia entirely. I had stumbled, completely by accident, into the world of ghostwriting. My apartment became my fortress. It was a small, second-floor walk-up in a less fashionable part of the city, But it was mine. Every surface was covered in books, not just history, but novels, poetry, biographies, a chaotic testament to a love of words that my family had never understood. Here, I wasn't Lillian, the failed academic. I was just Lillian. And in the quiet glow of my laptop screen, I was a secret kingmaker. I wrote soaring memoirs for CEOs who could barely compose an email. I crafted keynote speeches for politicians who stumbled over their own talking points. I took the disorganized, brilliant, but chaotic research of aging professors and turned it into the capstone books of their careers. The work was anonymous, but it was deeply satisfying. It was a craft, a puzzle of voice and structure. I was a literary chameleon, and I was, to my own surprise, making an excellent living, far more than I would have as a junior professor, struggling for grants and recognition. I had financial independence, something Daniel had, but something my parents never thought I would achieve on my own terms. But I could never tell them the truth. To them, ghostwriting was the ultimate intellectual sin. It was a betrayal of the authorial voice, a form of academic prostitution. In their black and white world, you either wrote under your own name or you were a hack. So I let them believe I was doing freelance editing and research assistance, vague terms that allowed them to maintain their narrative of my gentle, unimpressive failure. My only lifeline to sanity was Clara. We had met in graduate school, where she was studying graphic design. She had since become a fiercely successful designer with her own branding agency. She understood the freelance life, the hustle, and the unique sting of being the creative black sheep in a conventional family. We met for coffee every Friday, a ritual that was as necessary to me as air. "So, what's on the slab this week, Dr. Frankenstein?" she asked one rainy afternoon, her eyes twinkling over the rim of her mug. "A tech billionaire who thinks his life story is the next Steve Jobs," I sighed, stirring my latte. "He wants me to make his invention of a slightly more efficient food delivery app sound like the invention of the printing press." Clara snorted. "Of course he does. You're a historical necromancer, Lillian. You raise dead manuscripts from their graves and make them dance. It's a legitimate superpower." "Tell that to my family," I said, the familiar bitterness creeping into my voice. "Last week, my mother called and asked if my little writing business was covering my bills. She suggested I look into getting a proper job, maybe as a librarian at the university, for the pension." "A librarian?" Clara choked on her coffee. "Oh, honey, that's not an insult, that's a cry for help. They literally cannot compute your success because it doesn't fit into their pre-approved flowchart of life." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You know, one day, you're going to have to stop hiding your light under a bushel, Lil. One day you'll have to turn on the floodlights and let them see what you can really do." I just shook my head. "What's the point, Clara?" "They'd never see it. They'd just find a way to frame it as another one of my weird, embarrassing hobbies." "Maybe," she said, her expression turning serious. "Or maybe, just maybe, you'd finally get to see the look on their faces. And that, my friend, would be worth the price of admission." I laughed, but her words planted a seed, a tiny, dangerous kernel of an idea that I pushed down, deep into the soil of my resentment. It was a Tuesday morning in October when my two worlds collided. I was deep into the tech billionaire's hagiography, trying to find a fresh new synonym for visionary, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Dr. Lillian Petrova?" a man's voice asked. It was clipped, professional, and laced with an undercurrent of panic. "My name is Marcus Thorne." I sat bolt upright in my chair. Marcus Thorne, head of Parnassus Publishing, one of the most prestigious academic presses in the world. He was a legend. He was also, as I knew all too well, my father's publisher. "Yes, this is she," I said, my voice suddenly a little breathless. "Mr. Thorne, what can I do for you?" "Dr. Petrova," he said, and the formality felt strange. "I'll be direct. I have a delicate and extremely time-sensitive situation. I was given your name by a mutual acquaintance, Professor Albright, who I believe was your doctoral advisor." My old advisor. I felt a surge of warmth for the man. "Professor Albright spoke of your skills in the highest possible terms. He said, and I quote, 'If you have a manuscript that is structurally brilliant but textually a complete disaster, Dr. Petrova is the only person in the country who can save it, and she'll never speak a word of it to anyone.'" The backhanded compliment was so perfectly academic I almost smiled. He described you as the most discreet and gifted structural editor in the business. I do some freelance editing. Yes, I said carefully, my heart beginning to thrum a low, anxious beat. What is the project? There was a pause, and I could hear him take a deep breath. We have a major manuscript from a titan of the historical community. It's his magnum opus, the culmination of a life's work. Thematically, it's groundbreaking. The ideas are profound. But the manuscript itself, he hesitated, searching for the right word. It is structurally compromised. I knew that corporate euphemism. It was publishing speak for an unholy, unreadable mess. The author is a singular talent, but his prose has become dense, meandering. He cannot be approached for a rewrite. His ego? Well, let's just say the situation requires extreme discretion. The author cannot, under any circumstances, know that anyone other than an in-house copy editor has touched his work. We need a complete top-to-bottom rewrite, a ghostwrite, to be blunt, and we need it in 3 months. The pay reflects the urgency and the level of confidentiality required. He named a figure that made me grip the edge of my desk. It was more than I'd made in the entire previous year, but a cold dread was seeping into my bones. I knew with a certainty that was utterly sickening whose book he was talking about. There was only one titan on his roster whose ego was that famously fragile. Who is the author? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I can't disclose that over the phone, he said quickly. But I can send you the first 50 pages under a non-disclosure agreement. You'll see the scope of the challenge, and the genius buried within it. Send it, I said, my voice hollow. Minutes later, an email arrived. It was from Marcus Thorne, with a password-protected attachment. The password was Habsburg 1648. My hands were trembling as I typed it in. The file opened, and there it was. The title page read, The Habsburg Tapestry, Empire, Dynasty, and the Forging of the Modern World, by Professor Alistair Petrova. I started to read, and my blood ran cold. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just dense, it was chaotic. A tangled thicket of brilliant insights, half-finished anecdotes, and long, rambling digressions about his own past research. The central thesis appeared and disappeared like a ghost. Entire chapters contradicted each other. It was the work of a man who had spent so long being told he was a genius that he had forgotten how to communicate his ideas to anyone but himself. It was, in a word, unpublishable. My father's magnum opus was a complete and utter disaster. I leaned back in my chair, the screen's glow illuminating my face. The irony was so bitter, so crushing, it felt like a physical weight on my chest. The man who had dismissed my work as a tributary had produced a flood of incoherent nonsense. And now his publisher was unknowingly asking me, his failed daughter, to secretly save his legacy. The universe didn't just have a sense of humor. It had a taste for brutal Shakespearean tragedy. I stared at the manuscript, at my father's name on the page. I could say no. I could walk away and let his masterpiece crumble under the weight of his own hubris. Or I could take the job. I could step into the wreckage of his life's work, and from the rubble, I could build something magnificent. I could write the book he thought he had written. It was a terrible, wonderful, and terrifying opportunity. I spent the rest of the day in a fugue state, pacing my small apartment, the first 50 pages of my father's manuscript burning a hole in my screen. It was an impossible choice. To refuse the job felt like a small, petty act of revenge, one that no one but me would ever know about. It would mean letting my father fail, letting his reputation be tarnished by a book that would be savaged by critics if it ever saw the light of day. But to accept, that felt like a betrayal of a different kind. It meant colluding in a deception against him, working in the shadows to prop up the very ego that had cast such a long shadow over my own life. I read through the pages again, this time with a professional, dispassionate eye. And underneath the tangled prose and the self-aggrandizing detours, I saw it. The glimmers of brilliance, the core of a truly revolutionary argument about the Habsburgs' cultural influence. He was right. The ideas were profound. He just no longer had the tools, or perhaps the humility, to articulate them. He had lost the plot, literally. He needed a storyteller, someone to find the narrative thread and weave it into a cohesive whole. He needed me, not just any ghostwriter. He needed a historian who understood the material as deeply as he did, who could respect the core of his research while being ruthless with the execution. He needed his daughter, the one with the PhD in a niche field of European history. The cosmic joke of it all was so profound it looped back around from tragedy to a kind of dark comedy. I picked up the phone and called Clara. I told her everything: the call from Marcus, the identity of the author, the catastrophic state of the manuscript. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Oh my God," she finally whispered. "Lillian, this is not a job. This is an epic poem. This is the universe handing you the sword you never dared to ask for." "It feels like a trap, Clara," I said, my voice shaking. "If I do this, I'm enabling him. I'm perpetuating the myth of the great Alistair Petrova." "Or," she countered, her voice gaining strength, "you're finally stepping into your own power. Think about it. You won't just be editing. You'll be co-authoring his legacy. You'll be the architect of his masterpiece. He'll be holding up a trophy that you built, and he won't even know it. The power in that, Lil. It's staggering." I took a shaky breath. "But he'll never know. No one will." "Won't they?" she asked softly. "What if you made sure you had a way to change that?" A new thought, sharp and electrifying, pierced through my anxiety. She was right. Anonymity was the requirement, but it didn't have to be permanent. The next morning, I called Marcus Thorne. My voice was steady. My resolve hardened into steel. "Mr. Thorne," I said, "I've reviewed the materials. The project is challenging, but possible. I will accept the job on two non-negotiable conditions." "Name them," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. "First, the anonymity must be absolute, on both sides. Your staff will know me only by a code name. All communication will go through you. My father must never have an inkling that another historian has touched his work." "Of course," he agreed. "That is paramount." "Second," I said, taking a deep breath, "I want a clause added to my contract. It must state that while the work is to be performed anonymously, the right to reveal my contribution at a future date is mine and mine alone. I will have sole discretion over the time and place of such a reveal, should I ever choose to exercise that right." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear him thinking. It was a bizarre, unprecedented request. A ghostwriter demanding the future right to haunt the very work they were creating. "That's highly unusual, Dr. Petrova," he said slowly. "May I ask why?" "Let's just call it insurance," I replied, my voice cool. "For a project of this sensitivity, I feel it's a necessary protection for my professional reputation, should the circumstances ever change." He was silent for another moment. He was desperate. The publication date was set, the marketing budget was allocated. He had an unpublishable book from his star author and a ticking clock. "All right, doctor," he said with a sigh of resignation. "You'll have your clause. I'll have my legal team drafted immediately. Welcome aboard, Athena." That was to be my code name, the goddess of wisdom and craft. I hung up the phone and almost laughed. The next 3 months were a descent into a historical madness. My apartment became a Habsburg war room. I covered an entire wall with corkboard, using colored index cards and string to map out the book's structure, a sprawling web of ideas that I had to untangle and reweave. I didn't sleep. I survived on coffee and the fierce burning energy of my own resentment. It was grueling, painstaking work. I wasn't just fixing sentences. I was performing intellectual surgery. I deconstructed every chapter, every paragraph, every convoluted argument. I found the brilliant threads my father had lost in his own ego, and I began to weave them into a new tapestry, one that was strong, vibrant, and clear. It was an intimate and strangely violating process. I was excavating his mind, peeling back the layers of pompous prose to find the historian he used to be, the man who had first inspired me to follow in his footsteps, before the weight of his own celebrity crushed his clarity. About halfway through the process, he called me. I was surrounded by stacks of books on the Holy Roman Empire, my fingers stained with ink, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep. Lillian, his voice boomed through the phone, oblivious. Just a quick call. I was speaking with my editor at Parnassus. They're being so dreadfully slow with the copy edits, just dotting I's and crossing T's, you know. The substantive work, the genius, that's all there, of course. It just needs a light polish. I closed my eyes, a wave of cold fury washing over me. I was drowning in his substantive work, salvaging it from the depths, and he was describing my Herculean effort as a light polish. "I'm sure it will be worth the wait, Dad," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I could hear him smile on the other end. "Yes, well, one must be patient with the little people. How is your little writing business, by the way? Keeping you out of trouble?" "It's fine, Dad," I said, gritting my teeth. "I'm keeping busy." Keeping busy. That phrase again. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking with a rage so pure it felt like a power source. I turned back to the manuscript, to the chapter on the Pragmatic Sanction of 1713, and I poured all of my frustration, all of my hurt, all of my unspent brilliance into the words on the screen. I wasn't just fixing his book anymore. I was making it my own. I wrote the prose he wished he could write, the soaring lyrical sentences that connected dusty historical facts to the grand, breathing story of humanity. I was building a monument to his legacy, and with every word, I was secretly carving my own name into its foundation. 3 months to the day, I sent the finished manuscript to Marcus Thorne. It was done. It was, if I allowed myself a moment of pride, magnificent. A few hours later, an email from him appeared in my inbox. It contained only 8 words. "My God, Athena, you are a miracle worker." The first advance copies of the Habsburg Tapestry went out to the most influential historians and critics in the country. I waited, holding my breath. Then the first reviews started to trickle in, and the trickle quickly became a flood. They were not just good. They were ecstatic. "A masterpiece of historical narrative," wrote the London Review of Books. "Petrova, at the absolute height of his powers, has crafted a stunning lyrical reevaluation of the Habsburg legacy." A celebrated Oxford Don called it a work of breathtaking clarity and profound insight. It solidifies Alistair Petrova's place in the pantheon of great historians. My father, to put it mildly, was insufferable. He was reborn, invigorated by the praise. He'd been a prominent historian for decades, but this was different. This was adulation. This was the magnum opus he had always dreamed of writing, and the world was affirming his genius in a way it never had before. He called me not to connect, but to crow. I was his designated audience, the family member who would understand the significance of the praise, even if I was incapable of producing such work myself. "Lillian, are you sitting down? You must hear this," he said, his voice giddy with triumph one afternoon. He proceeded to read me, verbatim, a long glowing review from a major newspaper. He savored every laudatory adjective. "A narrative of breathtaking clarity," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "You see? They finally get it. They finally understand what I was trying to do all along." "No, Dad," I thought, my hand tightening on the phone. "They finally understand what I was doing." I just murmured, "That's incredible, Dad. I'm so happy for you." The lie tasted like poison. The family dinner to celebrate the book's pre-publication success was the worst yet. It was held at my parents' house, and the book itself, a handsome navy blue volume with my father's name in gold-embossed letters, sat in the center of the dining table like a holy relic. It was the only topic of conversation. My father recounted, with dramatic embellishments, the arduous process of writing it. My mother beamed, refilling his wine glass, her eyes shining with adoration. My brother Daniel, who had probably never read a history book in his life, was nonetheless an expert on its success. "I was talking to a partner at my firm, Dad," he said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "He's on the board of the National Book Award. He says there's already major buzz." Major... My father waved a dismissive yet deeply pleased hand. "Oh, it's not about awards, Daniel. It's about the work, the contribution to the field." Then Daniel, flushed with wine and familial pride, raised his glass. "A toast," he announced. "To Dad, a true genius, and the only real writer in the family. He shot a quick, smiling wink in my direction. It was meant to be a light-hearted jab, the kind of teasing I was supposed to be used to. But tonight, it landed like a punch to the gut. The only real writer in the family. I was sitting at a table celebrating a book that I had written, and my own brother was erasing my existence with a casual joke. I saw my mother smile at Daniel's wit. "Oh, Daniel, don't tease your sister," she said, her tone indulgent. "She tries her best with her little projects." I felt a sudden, dizzying wave of detachment, as if I were floating above the room, watching this strange, cruel play unfold. I smiled. It was a brittle, empty thing. The flaw, I thought to myself. The audience must be getting so frustrated with me right now. I was frustrated with myself. My passivity felt less like a shield and more like a cage I had built around myself. A week later, the formal invitation for the book launch gala arrived. It was printed on thick, creamy cardstock, the lettering an elegant script. The Parnassus Press and the University History Department requested the pleasure of my company at a black tie affair to celebrate the publication of The Habsburg Tapestry. My presence was not requested, it was assumed. I was a prop, the proud daughter, there to complete the picture of the perfect academic family. My mother called me the next day. "Lillian, dear, I was just calling about the gala. I do hope you have something suitable to wear." Her voice was laced with a familiar, gentle anxiety. "Please, darling, for your father's sake, try to look professional. Not one of those artistic, shapeless black things you're so fond of. This is an important night for him. We want him to be the focus." The subtext was, as always, painfully clear. Don't embarrass us. Blend in. Be invisible. Something inside me, something that had been dormant for a very long time, snapped. It wasn't a loud crack, but a quiet, decisive fracture. It was the shapeless black things. The casual dismissal of my personal style, the assumption that I would deliberately choose to be an eyesore on my father's big night. It was the final, tiny snowflake that causes the avalanche. That afternoon, I left my apartment and went shopping. I didn't go to my usual thrift stores or vintage shops. I went to a high-end boutique, a place I had only ever window shopped at. I walked in, and with a sense of calm deliberation that felt entirely new, I began to browse. I wasn't looking for something to blend in. I was looking for something to be seen in, and then I saw it. It was a floor-length gown, cut with an architectural simplicity that was both classic and modern. The color was a deep, luminous emerald green, the color of new life, of envy, of money. It was a color that demanded to be noticed. It was expensive, more than I had ever spent on a single piece of clothing in my life. I paid for it with the money I had earned from rewriting my father's book. I called Clara and told her what I'd done. She made me model it for her over a video call. She let out a low whistle. "Whoa, Lily, that's not a dress," she said, her eyes wide. "That is armor. You're not going to a party, you're going into battle." The day of the gala, my nerves were a tangled mess. I felt sick with a mixture of terror and exhilarating anticipation. I was getting my hair and makeup done, another unprecedented act of defiance, when my phone rang. It was Marcus Thorne. My heart leaped into my throat. "Lillian," he said, his voice serious. "I'm calling because I need to speak with you before tonight." "Marcus, what is it?" I asked, my voice tight. "We have an agreement. Absolute anonymity." "I know," he said, and he sounded genuinely conflicted. "And I have respected it. But this situation has escalated beyond what I anticipated. The praise, the reviews, they're not just for the ideas. They are for the prose, for the narrative. They are for your work. Alistair is accepting a level of acclaim that is, to be perfectly blunt, fraudulent. And my conscience as a publisher, and frankly as a man who values intellectual honesty, will not allow me to let this stand unchallenged." I sat down on the edge of my bed, my half-finished hair forgotten. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I have to do something," he said, his voice firming with resolve. "During my speech tonight, after I've said the requisite pleasantries about your father's vision, I am going to mention our anonymous collaborator. I am going to tell the audience that to make the text the masterpiece it is, We brought in a historian of unparalleled skill to work on the manuscript. I'm going to credit this person with the book's narrative clarity and its soaring prose. My breath caught in my chest. This was it. The moment Clara had foreshadowed. The one I had insured with that strange clause in my contract. It was happening. And then, Marcus continued, his voice dropping slightly, I am going to say that I believe this brilliant collaborator is in the room with us tonight, and I am going to ask them to take a bow, if they would so choose. The room started to spin. The choice. He wasn't going to out me. He was going to open a door and invite me to walk through it. The choice would be mine, in front of everyone. Lillian, he said gently, as if sensing my turmoil. You can stay seated. You can let the moment pass. No one will ever know it was you. Our contract for anonymity will remain intact. Or you can stand up. The choice will be yours, and yours alone. But I had to give you that choice. I had to give you that stage. What you do with it is entirely up to you. I was terrified. I was electrified. I thought of my PhD defense. I thought of the little articles and the shapeless black things. I thought of a decade of being patted on the head, of shrinking myself to fit into the tiny box they had built for me. Thank you, Marcus, I said, and my voice was surprisingly steady. Thank you for doing that. I'll be there. I didn't tell him what I would do. In that moment, I honestly didn't know myself. I arrived at the gala alone. The venue was a breathtaking neo-Gothic library owned by the university, its vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows whispering of history and prestige. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of intellectual chatter. Academics, donors, and university trustees mingled under the warm glow of chandeliers, glasses of champagne in hand. And then I saw them, holding court near the grand staircase. My family. My father, Alistair, looked every inch the man of the hour. He was laughing, one hand on the shoulder of the university president, basking in the light of their collective admiration. My mother, Eleanor, stood at his side, a picture of regal elegance, her smile radiant, her eyes sweeping the room with proprietary pride. And Daniel was there, ever the dutiful son, working the crowd, shaking hands with a dean, his face alight with the reflected glory of his father's success. I took a deep, steadying breath and started towards them, the silk of my emerald dress whispering against my skin. My mother was the first to see me. Her smile faltered, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly as she took in my appearance. The professionally styled hair, the subtle but perfect makeup, and the dress that did not blend in. Lillian, she said, her voice a little too bright. My goodness, that's quite a dress. It was not a compliment. It was an accusation. My father turned, his conversation momentarily interrupted. He gave me a cursory glance, a flicker of surprise in his eyes before it was replaced by his usual paternal indulgence. Lillian, good of you to make it, he said, before turning back to the president. As I was saying, the key to understanding Metternich is to understand his fear of... He had already dismissed me. Daniel, however, gave me his full, smirking attention. Wow, Lily, he drawled, looking me up and down. Dressed to kill. What's the occasion? Did you land a new ghostwriting client here tonight? Maybe the university president needs a speech touched up? His words, meant to be a familiar teasing barb, hung in the air between us. But for the first time, they didn't sting. They felt irrelevant. I smiled at him, not my usual tight, pained smile, but a slow, genuine curve of my lips. A smile that held a secret he couldn't even begin to guess at. Something like that, Danny, I said softly. I didn't wait for their permission to leave. I turned, my back straight, and walked away from my family's little circle of light. I went to the bar, my hand steady as I accepted a glass of champagne. Then I found my spot. It was a small, unoccupied space near a towering bookshelf, a place from which I had a clear, unobstructed view of the podium. And, more importantly, a place where anyone standing at that podium would have a clear, unobstructed view of me. I was no longer hiding in the shadows. I was waiting in the wings. The evening progressed in a predictable series of accolades. The university president took the stage first, his speech full of ponderous praise for my father's lifelong dedication to the institution and to the pursuit of historical truth. He was followed by Professor Albright, my old advisor, who spoke warmly of Alistair's early work and his influence on generations of students, myself included. He gave me a small, kind nod from the podium, and I saw my mother preen, pleased by this public acknowledgement of their daughter, however minor. Through it all, my father sat at the front table, the very picture of intellectual gravitas. He would nod gravely at the appropriate moments, a humble half-smile playing on his lips, soaking in the adulation like a dry sponge. I watched him, my champagne flute cool against my fingertips, my heart a steady, patient drum. Then Marcus Thorne walked to the podium. He was a sharp, commanding presence, his silver hair catching the light. The room fell silent. "Good evening," he began, his voice crisp and clear, carrying to every corner of the Grand Library. At Parnassus Press, we believe that history is not just a collection of facts, but a story. It is the great ongoing narrative of who we are, and tonight we are here to celebrate a magnificent new chapter in that story. The Habsburg Tapestry. He spoke for a few minutes about the press, about the importance of rigorous yet accessible scholarship. Then he turned his attention to my father. Alistair Petrova's vision for this book was monumental, he said, and I saw my father puff out his chest slightly. He brought to us a mountain of research, a lifetime of insight, the brilliant foundational core of a masterpiece. Marcus paused, letting the words settle. I leaned forward slightly. I knew what was coming. But as any great artist, any master craftsman knows, he continued, his voice taking on a new, more deliberate cadence. Sometimes it takes a second pair of hands to chisel the final form of the masterpiece from the marble. A low, confused murmur rippled through the audience. People exchanged puzzled glances. My father's humble smile tightened at the edges. He shot a look at Marcus, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. My mother's hand went to her husband's arm, a small, questioning gesture. Daniel frowned, looking from Marcus to his father, trying to decipher the shift in the script. Marcus ignored the ripple of confusion. He held the room in the palm of his hand. To bring Alistair's profound but undeniably complex ideas to the wider audience they so richly deserved, we at Parnassus made a decision. We engaged an anonymous historian, a true master of narrative, a ghost in our machine, to collaborate on the final manuscript. The word collaborate landed with the force of a physical blow. The murmuring grew louder. "This person," Marcus went on, his voice ringing with a conviction that was either brilliant acting or genuine admiration, "took the brilliant core of this book and polished it into the gem we are all celebrating tonight. The soaring prose you have read about in the reviews, the narrative clarity that critics have universally lauded, that was their contribution. This book is not the work of one great mind, but the testament to a true, albeit secret, partnership." He paused again, his eyes sweeping the room. He was a showman. He was building the tension to a breaking point. My father was no longer smiling. His face was a mask of chalky disbelief, his eyes locked on Marcus with a dawning horror. This was his night, his coronation, and this upstart publisher was rewriting the royal decree. Marcus's eyes scanned the crowd of upturned faces, and for a split second they met mine. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible connection, but it was enough. "I do not know if this brilliant co-author would even want to be recognized for their work," he said, his voice dropping into a more intimate, conspiratorial tone. "Their contract, after all, guaranteed them absolute anonymity. But I feel it is my professional and moral duty to at least offer them the chance. The credit is theirs for the taking." The final act. My throat was dry. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. "So," Marcus Thorne concluded, his voice resonating in the now dead-silent room, "if our anonymous collaborator is here with us tonight, would you please do us the immense honor of taking a bow?" Time seemed to warp, to stretch and slow down. Every eye in that room was on Marcus, then began a slow, sweeping search of the crowd, looking for a sign, a movement. I saw everything with a painful, crystalline clarity. I saw my father's face, no longer horrified, but imploring, his eyes begging the universe for this to be a joke. A mistake. I saw my mother, her face ashen, her perfectly painted lips parted in a silent O of panic. I saw my brother, Daniel, his usual cocksure smirk gone, replaced by a look of utter, slack-jawed bewilderment. In that stretched-out second, a decade of slights and condescensions played out in my mind. The commendable effort, the niche tributary, the little articles, the shapeless black things, the eternal, loving, soul-crushing disappointment. Why don't you say something? The voice in my head had always screamed. Now the whole world was waiting for me to do just that. With a hand that was perfectly steady, I reached out and placed my half-full champagne glass on the polished wood of a nearby table. The soft click sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. And then I stood up. A collective gasp sucked the remaining air out of the library. It was a physical sound, a wave of shock that washed over the entire assembly. For a moment, there was nothing but a stunned, absolute silence. I didn't just stand. I straightened to my full height, my shoulders back, my chin up, the emerald of my dress a beacon in the sea of black and white. And I looked across the sea of shocked faces, past the university president, past the donors, past my old professors, until my eyes found my father's. His face crumpled. It was not a simple expression of shock. It was a devastating, multi-layered collapse. I saw the lightning-fast calculation in his eyes, the denial, the horrifying comprehension, and finally, the raw, public humiliation. In that single shattering moment, he knew. He knew that the book in his name was not entirely his, and he knew that I, his invisible daughter, was the one who had made it shine. My mother looked as if she had seen a ghost, her hand flying to her mouth. Daniel's jaw was literally hanging open, his face a cartoon of disbelief. From the stage, Marcus Thorne did not smile. He simply gave me a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of profound respect, and then he began to clap. It was a single, authoritative sound in the silence. A few people near him, publishing colleagues who were in on the secret, joined in. Then Professor Albright, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face, began to applaud. The applause grew, hesitant and confused at first, then spreading through the room as people began to understand the sheer audacious drama of what they were witnessing. It became solid, real. It was for me. I did not bow. I did not smile. I just stood there, a statue carved from my own quiet resolve, in the center of the storm I had created, and I held my father's gaze. For the first time in my entire life, I was not invisible. In his moment of ultimate triumph, he was. The applause eventually sputtered out, replaced by an electric, frantic wave of whispering. The carefully curated atmosphere of polite academic celebration had been shattered, and in its place was the raw, thrilling energy of scandal. I remained standing for a beat longer, letting the reality of the moment solidify. Then I calmly sat back down, smoothing the folds of my dress. The rest of the event was a shambles. The master of ceremonies, flustered, tried to return to the program, but the energy had irrevocably shifted. My father was supposed to give a long, prepared speech, a triumphant oration about his long journey with the Habsburgs. He did not give it. He remained seated, a frozen figure at the head table, while my mother whispered furiously in his ear. The gala limped to an awkward, premature conclusion. People began to leave, casting furtive, fascinated glances in my direction. I was no longer Lilian Petrova, the quiet, disappointing daughter. I was a mystery, a protagonist in a drama they were all desperate to understand. I made my way to the coat check, a strange sense of calm settling over me. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind not triumph, but a quiet, hollowed-out peace. I had done it. The world had not ended. As I waited for my coat, they found me, my family. The three of them cornered me in the marble alcove, their faces a thunderous portrait of fury and betrayal. The public masks were gone. "How could you?" my father hissed, his voice low and trembling with a rage that was all the more terrifying for its restraint. "You stood up there and you humiliated me in front of my colleagues, in front of the entire world. You destroyed my night." I looked at him, at this man whose approval I had once craved like oxygen, and I felt nothing, just a vast, quiet stillness. I did the work, Dad, I said, my voice even. You were about to accept praise for work you didn't do. Marcus gave me a choice. I simply made it. This is monstrous, my mother broke in, her voice shaking with indignation. Absolutely monstrous. Your father has dedicated his entire life to his work, to this book. This was his moment, his legacy, and you stole it from him for a moment of selfish theatrics. No, Mother, I said, turning to face her. I didn't steal it. I saved it. You have no idea what that manuscript was. It was an unpublishable disaster. He would have been professionally crucified. I gave him this moment. I built this legacy for him. I just decided, after 35 years, that I deserved to be a part of it too. Daniel, who had been silent, finally spoke, his face a mess of confusion and dawning realization. So, all this time, this ghostwriting thing, you were actually good at it? He looked at me as if for the first time. And this book, you actually wrote it? I co-wrote it, I corrected him gently. It's his research and my narrative, his ideas and my words. I turned my gaze back to my father, whose face had gone pale. That's the truth, Dad. I know you hate the way it sounds in front of all these people, but it's the truth. He just stared at me, speechless. The coat check attendant arrived with my coat, breaking the spell. I took it from her, slipping it over my shoulders. I never lied to any of you, I said, my voice soft but clear. I just stopped trying to explain myself to people who had already decided who I was. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving the three of them standing there in the marble alcove, a shattered tableau of a family that had just collided with a truth it could no longer ignore. As I walked out into the cool night air, I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. I just felt clean, as if I had finally scrubbed away a stain that had been on me my entire life. My phone buzzed in my purse as I drove home through the glittering city streets. It was Clara. "Oh my God, Lillian!" she shrieked into the phone, her voice crackling with excitement. "A friend of mine was at the gala. She live-streamed the whole thing. My group chat is literally on fire. You stood up. You actually stood up. The Queen has left the building. Tell me everything." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that came from deep in my belly. And as I drove, I told her. Her fierce, uncomplicated joy was a balm on my soul. Her validation was the only praise I had ever truly needed. The days that followed the gala were strangely quiet in my personal life, but cacophonous in the outside world. The story of what happened in the library spread like wildfire through the academic community and even into the mainstream literary press. My father's book, ironically, became an instant bestseller. The scandal was the best marketing campaign Parnassus Press could have ever hoped for. Everyone wanted to read the book at the center of the drama, to try and discern for themselves where Alistair Petrova's genius ended and his daughter's narrative mastery began. I became a figure of intense speculation. In some circles, I was a hero, a whistleblower who had bravely exposed the hypocrisy and ego that can fester in the ivory tower. In others, I was a pariah, an ungrateful daughter who had committed a stunning act of patricide for personal gain. I ignored all of it. I unplugged from the chatter and spent my days in my quiet apartment, reading for pleasure for the first time in months. I felt a profound sense of release, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The need for their approval, which had been a constant grinding pressure my whole life, was simply gone. About a week after the gala, my father called. I almost didn't answer, but I forced myself to. His voice was different. The booming, authoritative baritone was gone, replaced by something thin and tired. "Lillian," he said, "we need to talk." I agreed to meet him for coffee at a neutral cafe far from the university. He looked older than I had ever seen him, the lines on his face deeper, his shoulders slumped. He did not apologize, not in the way most people would. An outright "I'm sorry" was not in his vocabulary. But he came close. I did something after that night," he said, staring into his coffee cup. I went into my study and I found my original draft, the one I submitted to Marcus. I read it, the whole thing. He looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a weary, grudging respect. And then I read the book, the one that's in stores. He shook his head slowly. I see it now, Lillian. I see your work. I see what you did. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. It wasn't forgiveness I was looking for, because I had done nothing wrong. It was acknowledgement. And there it was. Our relationship, if we're going to have one, I said, my voice steady, it has to be based on that, Dad. On that honesty. No more performances, no more narratives, just the truth. He nodded slowly. The truth. It was a beginning. Daniel reached out too, with a text message that was surprisingly sincere. Lily, I'm an idiot. I was an idiot. I'm so sorry for all the jokes. I followed their lead. I never really took the time to see you. It was a crack in the facade, a chance for something new. Even my mother eventually sent me a stilted, formal email suggesting we have lunch. The dynamics of my family had been shattered, but in the wreckage, there was an opportunity to rebuild something more authentic. Professionally, my world exploded. The ghost of Parnassus Press, as one article had dubbed me, was suddenly in high demand. I received 3 tenure-track job offers from prestigious universities who admired my demonstrated ability to bridge the gap between academic research and public narrative. A rival publishing house offered me a senior acquisitions editor position. But the most intriguing offer came from Marcus Thorne. He asked me to lunch. Lillian, he said, getting straight to the point. What you did for your father's book was extraordinary. There are hundreds of brilliant academics out there with vital, important research who can't write a compelling sentence to save their lives. I want to start a new imprint at Parnassus, one dedicated to finding those projects and pairing them with narrative specialists like you. I don't want you to be a ghost anymore. I want you to run it. He wanted me to be a kingmaker, but this time, from a throne of my own, out in the open. I accepted on the spot. I was no longer a ghostwriter. I was a publisher. It's been a year since that night at the gala. I'm sitting in my new office, a corner suite with a view of the city skyline. The first book from my imprint, Athena Press, is sitting on my desk. My relationship with my father is a quiet, tentative thing, but it is real. We talk about history not as a contest, but as a shared passion. We are slowly, awkwardly getting to know each other. My brother Daniel and I are closer than we've ever been. He asked me about my work now, with genuine interest. My mother is still struggling. It's hard for her to let go of the old story, the one where she was the wife of a singular genius. But she is trying. For years, I believed that my value was something that had to be granted to me by others, specifically by my family. I thought their validation was the prize, but my biggest mistake wasn't being a ghostwriter. It was being a ghost in my own life, haunting the edges of my own story. The moment I stood up in that ballroom wasn't an act of revenge or a cry for attention. It was an act of resurrection, my own. I finally understood that you can't be seen by people who refuse to open their eyes, so you have to learn to be your own light.